All right, you to join. We'll go ahead and get kicked off. It is 11 o'clock. And my name is Anna Burns. I am a board member of the Ohio Stormwater Association, as well as a few other things that I do. I also work at Davie Resource Group and manage our environmental consulting team here at Davie. I am going to just be your MC for our session today. It's a regulatory update, emerging stormwater issues presented by Lou McMahon with McMahon Dulles. A little bit before we get rolling about OSWA. Our organization is dedicated to advancing the management of stormwater and related natural resources through education, leadership, watershed-based coordination, and technical assistance in Ohio. We are a nonprofit organization under the umbrella of WAMO here in the state of Ohio. We do have a board of directors, and those folks are listed here, as well as 7 additional board members that serve to manage our organization. We would love for you to be a member of the Ohio Stormwater Association. That does afford you some member benefits. In order to join the Ohio Stormwater Association as a member, you do need to start off at the WAMO page, and we are a organization division affiliate within WAMO. And so in joining WAMO, you would want to check the Ohio Stormwater Association box line over there on the left, and also check stormwater over there on the right that's circled in red. And members do generally get discounted admission to events such as this, and get added to our email list, and as well as a few other benefits. We also have a couple subcommittees within our organization that we focus on: education, marketing and membership, regulatory updates, transportation, industrial, stormwater issues, and also are working on getting together an extreme weather subcommittee within OSWA too. Of very important note to folks here who are interested in obtaining CEUs or PDHs for this event today, please do complete the survey link provided in the chat. So Dana has already added that link to the chat. We will be asking questions in the chat. So Felicia or I will be posting questions in the chat. And you will need to, within this link, there is a spot for you to respond to questions. And that is just a process of documenting that you were here. And it is needed for generally those organizations want to see that to document that you were present. And this is the way we're going to do that today. So if you have any questions, feel free to message me or Dana, and we can help you figuring that out. But the link is up there and live for everyone right now. So kicking it off to Lou, today's speaker, Lou McMahon. He's a partner with McMahon Dulles, and also the leader of the legal track at the Ohio Stormwater Conference, and does an amazing job at running that track and providing us all kinds of legal updates and discussions about current water law and issues within water law regulatory things. So thank you for joining us today, Lou, and I look forward to listening to all you have to offer today, Lou. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you share your screen.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. I'm going to make sure my screen is up first. And people see that?
Yep,
Great.
You're good.
Excellent. So thank you, Anna. Thank you to Ohio Stormwater folks and WAMO for this opportunity. For those of you who have been to the Stormwater Conference, I haven't taken all 5 presentations I did last time and condensed them into an hour, but we've taken a lot of the hot topics and a lot of things and tried to put them in a full hour here. So there will be time for question and answer at the end, but I'm going to go pretty quickly. And what we've tried to do in making this presentation is to make sure there are links for things for you to go back on. So this will be on the website and available, and you can follow on some of the things that I reference and follow up on them. You can always give me a call as well. This is what we do. My firm is McMahon Dulles. We are an environmental focused firm and with offices in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. And we do work all across Ohio, all water related, all environmental related, in Ohio and beyond. So we work with a lot of municipalities on infrastructure issues, stormwater, wet weather, drinking water, land use, and brownfields issues in particular. So today, this is going to be focused on stormwater. Gonna try to make sure I can advance this. My computer. This would be one short presentation or a long presentation if there's just one slide, but let me my apologies. All right. I am very sorry. And I know I can get through everything in expedited fashion, but this is not what I intended.
Lou, do you want to unshare and then reshare the screen? Maybe it's locked up.
Maybe it is. Okay, let me try again. Sorry, everybody. And it is not rolling. If you hold a minute, I'm going to get some technical assistance here. I'm very sorry about this. So I will start talking about what I'm going to talk about, just so you know. Today, we're going to focus an awful lot on nutrients being one of the hot topics. We're going to talk about the MOMI TMDL. We're going to talk about some other guidance documents. And then we'll talk about a situation that involves Euclid, Ohio, a peculiar situation. So that's going to be the thrust of what we talk about. Related to that, particularly in the Euclid situation, but a very big issue is environmental justice. It is a big EPA issue and an initiative that's still evolving as to what it's going to mean for all of our jurisdictions and all of our regulated entities. We'll have a question, a little time about jurisdictional issues, and then a little bit about some hot topics, infrastructure spending and integrated planning. So we're going to roll through that. There we go. Okay, so my apologies for those difficulties. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this nutrients question because this is really one of the emerging issues, and it's causing a whole lot of change and consternation among regulated entities. I'm going to start with a little bit about the MOMI TMDL because this is where Ohio EPA is putting a lot of its efforts. The algal bloom situation in Lake Erie has driven litigation and has driven Ohio EPA and the states around the Great Lakes to really push for phosphorus reduction so that we don't have a situation like we had with Toledo's drinking water a few years ago. How do we avoid this situation? That's a long time in building. Some could argue 150 years in the building with the draining of the Black Swamp and making farms there. But spike more recently, and how are we going to address this in a fair and equitable and efficient way? So Ohio EPA is using the tools of the Clean Water Act to do what's called a far-field TMDL. And I know a lot of people have had a lot of interest in this. This is something that commands a lot of attention. The far-field TMDL is not just a typical TMDL, which looks at near field or where discharges affect stream segments next to the land that they're flowing through, but what's the effect way downstream, in this case, the whole Maumee watershed and its effect in Western Lake Erie Basin. And that's something new. So it's a new approach, new modeling, something very new for Ohio EPA. They're doing it in expedited fashion. They intend to have the draft TMDL report due for public comment in December. The impairments in Lake Erie and the Western Basin are for recreation and an aesthetic impairment and for drinking water at the 3 zones that are part of the Western Basin, the Western Open Waters, the Near Shore, and the Islands District. And you can see the whole watershed, the Maumee watershed, extends beyond Ohio. It is, somebody once told me, I believe it was 20% of the sediment that goes into the Great Lakes comes from the Maumee Basin. So there's heavy agriculture here, land use that lends itself to the Maumee depositing a lot. Toledo's Harbor obviously needs a lot of dredging every year to maintain its navigability. So these are Ohio EPA slides. So I'm going to go through these quickly, but this is just to remind people, what is a TMDL? It stands for total maximum daily loads. And a TMDL, you know, in the concept of the Clean Water Act was when water is not meeting its uses and water quality standards aren't being met, you have to go to another planning process called a TMDL, and it's total maximum daily load, because the focus was on pollutants and a daily load. That has blossomed to much broader than that. Not all pollutants have a daily or acute impact. Nutrients are a good example. The accumulation over the growing season is the operative question and not a daily question. Nonetheless, they're called TMDLs. It's a planning document to allocate pollutants to different sources. How much can a certain water body take in a similative capacity? And then where do we allocate those pollutants, and where the allocations end up being implemented legally or by other reasonable assurances. So it's a planning document. By itself, it doesn't change anything, it doesn't change policy. It provides the technical details and analysis that encompasses both point sources and non-point source contribution. Like I said, it doesn't change policy, but as we see, the Clean Water Act provides, and particularly for stormwater folks, permits need to be issued consistent with the TMDL. So it's when the permit is issued that the rubber hits the road in terms of its enforcement. And we've seen that, if most people have seen that in the general stormwater permit, there's the list of TMDLs that are applicable for certain areas that may have made changes from the overall general permit. This is the study plan that is in process right now for the TMDL, or for the Maumee TMDL. It's in that 4th bullet. This is a result of some litigation about rulemaking in Ohio. So TMDLs have this open process that has the ability to make comments along the way and to participate. You get an official draft TMDL. Ultimately, that's subject to public comment, and then has to go to US EPA for approval. That's once it's approved, then it's a standing document, and Ohio EPA figures out how to implement that in permits or otherwise. The PMR, the preliminary modeling report. This again is Ohio EPA asking, these are the questions Ohio EPA was asking itself of what they were trying to do with this report, which had just came out in June. But this is as they were posing those. How do we achieve reductions? So what's the appropriate margin of safety? How do you plan for growth? And how do you balance between an allocation of load between point and non-point sources? Again, the statute that was passed sets out what has to be looked at. Again, the important part is to identify the sources of phosphorus and the relationships between those sources, consider the loading trends in the Maumee River watershed, and then evaluate where are the opportunities for cost-effective solutions. And Ohio EPA is putting a lot of emphasis on the cost effectiveness of solutions. Instead of everybody being getting cut down to 40% lower than maybe what they discharged before, how do we find the best bang for the buck for phosphorus reduction? These are just some other things you can find if you go to Ohio EPA's webpage that they talk about. Everyone on the regulated side with a point source is always curious as to what's going on with agriculture. This documents the increase in livestock in the Maumee Basin in Ohio. One of the things that's come out of the analysis that Ohio EPA has noted is that the weather impacts have a big role in whether in the harmful algal blooms and when they spike. Higher rainfalls, and we have more intense rainfalls, particularly in this northwest part of the state, that may take legacy phosphorus and nutrients out of the land and put it into the water column seem to have a very important impact, particularly for dissolved reactive phosphorus, the DRP, that is the one most available to fuel harmful algal blooms. There's other information that we have. 5 out of 10 wettest years in records have occurred recently, very recently. These are trends in dissolved reactive phosphorus. What's important here is that, you know, the trend was going down. If you want to look at the regulated side, trend of was going down in the 90s and in 2000s as the POTWs and other actions were implementing lots of expensive infrastructure improvements, and stormwater regulations were coming online. So the increase is coming from something else. It's not, the argument is it's not coming from the point source discharges, but from something else happening on the land that's getting into the water column. So climate resilience is also a factor that they're looking at, especially with extreme weather and weather changes having that impact on available phosphorus. There are other state law or policy changes that the state is taking in this effort. You know, there's the H2 Ohio program. There are dollars going to natural, putting in natural features. There's restrictions on manure application. There are education requirements. The TMDL is part of that, and we'll take those into consideration. This is something the state has noted. They've been spending a lot of money on putting natural infrastructure in place, large scale GI, if you will, or best management practices in many places. We'll be seeing the benefits of those in the years to come. And this is how Ohio EPA has laid out the opportunities of where it's trying to get its 40% reduction of load into Lake Erie, particularly to the Western Basin, consistent with what it laid out with the other states and its Ohio Domestic Action Plan. So these are the options. And if you look at the bottom, you can see the point sources are a small percentage, if you will, on this graphic, and stormwater is a small percentage of that. So in June, the Ohio EPA came out with the preliminary modeling results in their report. I encourage people to take a look at it. The link is there. This is going, you know, this has been open for comment. It's going to be the basis for which the final report, final draft report is done by the end of the year. So if you want to know where Ohio EPA is going, this is a very good indicator. One of the things that they noted in there is within the watershed, the Maumee watershed in Ohio, only 4.3% of that is covered by a stormwater permit. And a big chunk of that 4.3% is the city of Toledo itself. So stormwater, that's important for Ohio EPA to articulate that, because that's a small component of the load of any pollutants that are going into the Maumee River. The report also talks about the benefits that have been ongoing from all the BMPs that MS4s and other entities have been doing, particularly noting the benefits of street sweeping, tree canopy, moving towards pervious surfaces and recharge where possible. So those are being accounted for. What you can read when you read that is that Ohio EPA does not believe stormwater permitting is the place to get the biggest bang for the buck in what is a largely agricultural watershed. There are a couple things that point you to, this is page, I believe page 100 of this report. So when TMDLs set out the planning document, they get then rolled into your MS4 permits. This is why this is important for stormwater utilities and entities. It's not going to roll in, the Farfield TMDL is not going to be in place until a general permit renewal in 2026. So you will have to do any TMDL for your near field stream conditions that may apply to you. Those are there. But in particular, the focus is going to come in 2026 in the next permit. There's going to be some cost, will vary depending on what each MS4 is doing. This is in the report itself. You might have to do additional inspections or an education, more cleanouts, some of those BMPs. There is specifically likely to be a new requirement for post-construction part of the minimum controls of an MS4 permit. And you see the list of things that are possible that are going to be required there. To retrofit one existing stormwater BMP, to perform some restoration of 300 feet of channelized stream, to pass an ordinance. These are things that anybody who's in the Maumee watershed should be looking at, because they could very well be required in your 2026 permit. And again, we focus on the Maumee because this is the tip of the spear, if you will. It is likely that things don't just stay in Maumee, especially where there's a requirement to amp up your best management practices. Everybody with an MS4 or is in the stormwater business should be paying attention to this. These are some other things from the report. It does put in perspective where they're looking for reductions and how little they expect to be able to squeeze out of point sources. Stormwater being one of those, the combined sewer overflows another, and unsewered communities, and that the POTWs are themselves already well advanced in the technology that they've put in. So the stormwater is just one of them. Looking for 5 metric tons reduction to get to the goal that they want to get to for the entire Ohio Maumee watershed. That's a fraction compared to non-point source and particularly agriculture. This is figure 43 out of the report. I think it's page 97, and it tells you how they're going about trying to put things together in there. So you can see the full menu of what Ohio is trying to do to meet with this, that the TMDL is taking into account. It's not just allocating mathematically loads across the board, but it's trying to find out where to, again, is the best bang for the buck, with the goal of delisting Lake Erie from any impairment list. Okay, so it's the breezy version of the Maumee TMDL. Something else I want to make sure you put on your radar is Ohio House Bill 385. This got a lot of headlines 2 years ago. It actually also applies to the Maumee Basin as it was written. Prohibit municipal waste discharges, period, from POTWs if there's a violation, and to increase the penalties. This grows out of the Maumee, I think city of Maumee situation, and was a shot across the bow. I raised this because there's another version of this legislation that is floating around the State House that is actually adds a requirement relating to satellite communities that don't have their own POTW, but have a collection system. And it would require a permit for those communities. Some states have this already. Ohio does not have that. That would not be restricted under some of the drafts that are about, would not be restricted just to the Maumee, but that would be statewide. So if you're in a community that is a satellite community, you have an MS4, you don't have a POTW, you may have a new permit requirement that would require an operator in order to operate a collection system. Just that is not law. It is something being discussed. I want to point you to this document, and this sets up sort of what we're going to talk about with Euclid, that just this past April, US EPA came out with their memo updating their national nutrient strategy. And you can see by the subject matter, accelerating nutrient pollution reductions in the nation's water. This is available on their website. I invite you to take a look. There's a lot in this document, but some of it explains how vigorously US EPA is going to go after this issue. And it's definitely a different approach than Ohio is taking, in the Maumee, trying to get the best bang for the buck and where the defensible, science-based, cost-effective reductions are going to come from. This is a push to try to get everybody lower on nutrients, particularly phosphorus. And some of the things you can take a look at, it lists these great governing principles. First and foremost, it says advance equity and environmental justice. And we're going to talk a fair bit about environmental justice as an emerging regulatory theme. It is in everything that this current EPA is doing. It talks about build and foster partnerships, both with ag community and with state and local entities, follow the science and invest in data-driven solutions, support innovation, scale successful initiatives. These are all wonderful governing principles, hardly any nobody could object to those in any way. The strategies, however, tell you where the rubber hits the road on this. When they talk about collaboration, they specifically have time with, or much of the memo where they talk about collaborate with USD and the ag sector. That's because Ohio EPA has no jurisdiction over those entities. So it's got to work collaboratively. Again, in Ohio, the effort is the TMDL articulates what's out there, and Department of Ag and H2 Ohio and a number of other initiatives have to work with the agricultural sector, which is largely, other than CAFOs and livestock, excluded from Clean Water Act jurisdiction. The memo also talks about promoting the One Water approach, which I invite you to take a look at. Clean Water Alliance has referenced that, and a lot of that is involved with integration of approach to water and watershed basis. And that jives very well with what we, a couple years ago, were just calling integrated planning under the Clean Water Act, which is now part of the Clean Water Act. I'll have some comments about that at the end. That, I think, is a valuable thing for stormwater professionals to know. And if you want to identify your stormwater goals and integrate them with the other, municipal obligations, this is the time to start doing that. This last third bullet under strategies, urging more robust adoption of numeric nutrient criteria. This is what we're going to talk about with Euclid. And in particular, the document talks about promoting their new stressor response-based numeric criteria, which came out in guidance in August 2021. This is setting up, this is an articulation and memo of what's been going on in the Euclid situation that I'm going to give you a full rundown on. And then it talks about further reducing nutrient loads from point sources. Again, by itself, everybody should be doing less. If you can, whatever you can do at almost whatever the cost, you should be doing it, is how this memorandum reads to many people. So, if there's, and it doesn't limit which point sources that is. It doesn't say specifically POTWs. The memo talks just about regulated or point sources, which are inherently regulated. That could include stormwater. All right, I'm blowing through that very quickly. Now I want to get on to Euclid, because this is a very hot topic where a lot of these themes come together. Certainly the nutrient permitting issues, and environmental justice. So just a quick review for people who don't know Euclid. It's called the lakefront city. It's immediately west of Cleveland on the lake. It's a city that was heavy industrial and largely blue collar for its heydays after World War II and into the 70s and 80s. But it has these challenges, and as I'm going to show you, there's significant challenges, so that when this specific objection to Euclid's proposed permit comes in, Euclid has to throw up its hands and say, what are we going to do? Let me give you an example. Euclid's a lakefront city. They spent 13 years figuring out how to do a new lakefront park, where they took over by easement the maintenance of lakefront property that was heavily eroding in Euclid, and negotiated deals with those lakefront property owners in order to build this new park that stretches from Sims Park, their lakefront park, farther, more than a mile. So it's a new linear park open to the whole city. Their city now is responsible for erosion control. The lakefront property owners get lake view, but not the responsibility of fighting erosion, and the city gets a new park. This is a model that a lot of people are using. Cuyahoga County in particular is trying to extend this in other places in Cuyahoga County along the lake. So Euclid values its water resources. This is a quick shot of Sims Park, the park on Euclid's lakefront. Beautiful park, encourage you to visit. Euclid has challenges though, like entering suburbs across Northeast Ohio, and when manufacturing has, our economy has moved away from it, Euclid has suffered. City population and owner occupancy of its houses has been in decline for a number of decades. Percent of people living in poverty has increased. Median household income has fallen sharply behind. Last data I saw had Euclid's median household income almost the same as it was in 1990 without adjusting for inflation. So where the US and Ohio almost doubled in that time from what they were in 1990, Euclid is almost the same as what they were. And that's not in real dollars, that's in nominal dollars of that year. Euclid also has been, in addition to doing its Lakefront Park, laboring vigorously and expensively to complete a wet weather consent decree. One that in 2011 was expected to cost $136 million. They've already spent more than, actually now $200 million. And it will probably come in at twice the original estimate. That is a huge burden for a community that is not flush with cash, if you will, as economic challenges. So, and Euclid's been doing its best to meet all the deadlines. It's major reconstruction of wastewater treatment plant. It has completed all the SSO control projects. It is down to doing CSO control projects, which it wants to do in an integrated fashion so that it can use green infrastructure and be very efficient. Just to give you an idea, this is Euclid's very land constrained wastewater treatment plant. Every inch is already in use. You can see the neighbors are right on top of the plant. And it doesn't even stretch all the way to the lake. That's a senior center back at the very north over there. This is critical when we get to the question of, well, what could Euclid do to put in new processes or equipment, if it existed, to reduce phosphorus even more, the way US EPA wants. There's no place to put anything. This is a little dramatic here, but all roads lead to Euclid, like famously said of Gettysburg, where the battle took place. Euclid happened to be at the right place or wrong place at the right time. It got its draft permit on August 5th of 2021. In that same month, US EPA issued its guidance on nutrients for water quality standards in lakes and streams. By September of that year, US EPA had objected to the permit. There was some discussion back and forth. The conversation was always, well, you got to go lower on phosphorus. I'm told. I was not part of these conversations, but I'm told US EPA and Ohio EPA were talking. US EPA was demanding you just have to have lower phosphorus limits. Ohio has, by regulation, 1.0 milligrams per liter phosphorus limit. But US EPA was pushing Ohio to make the permit something lower. Didn't always specify what it was. On November 2nd, the process requires that if Ohio EPA objects to or demands that US EPA put in writing what their objection to the permit is, that US EPA then in their permit oversight function has to put a specific objection in a letter. And this rarely has ever happened in Ohio. In fact, there's nobody at Ohio EPA remembers that this happening before. But almost a year ago, US EPA did put forth a specific objection to Euclid's permit demanding a lower phosphorus level. The specific objection lays out US EPA's argument, and I believe it was the first time in Ohio EPA's opinion that they did so. So what is the argument? What is US EPA's complaint here? It's this: Euclid discharges to the central basin of Lake Erie. The central basin is listed as impaired on the public water drinking use for having 2 samples in a 5-year period above the 1.6 milligram per liter limit. I believe I have my units right, but I may not. So the Ohio has listed that those 2 samples were from 2017, and it's within a 5-year period. So US EPA's letter, I gave you the link, I encourage you to look at it, took their 2021 guidance with their new stressor response model that says, if you have X amount of phosphorus, you're going to end up with this much microcystin from algae. And plugged those numbers in and said, only 7.0 micrograms per liter would satisfy the requirements to bring the central basin into compliance. They said, bottom line, background phosphorus in the central basin is 9.9 milligrams per liter. You can't issue a permit that has this much phosphorus in it. You should be looking at a variance that includes water quality trading or a completed TMDL, or we can talk about a negotiated phosphorus limit. This is a pretty astonishing letter to make those leaps into regulatory action. First of all, there is no and Ohio EPA has made this very clear, there's no technology that could get down to essentially a zero discharge of phosphorus for a POTW. Ohio EPA's same report where they listed the Central Basin as impaired is also said for the recreational side that the majority of microcystin that gets to the Central Basin flows from the Western Basin, which is where the Maumee discharges and where the algal blooms are generated and happen. That is the source. The model that the US EPA has applied does not take that into account. So some very serious questions back and forth. This all led by process. Ohio EPA, Euclid, and several other entities demanded a hearing on the specific objection so that they could point out these issues and amend the record and show US EPA where they had been missing the boat. I encourage you to take a look at some of these if you're at all interested in this. Ohio EPA did an outstanding presentation, an hour-long presentation that is available at this link. Those are the slides and presentation. But I should note, as the hearing started back on June 8th, with the regional administrator from Region 5 presiding, US EPA made a very interesting and I think harmful to their cause announcement. They said, well, look, we believe Michigan is moving towards a 0.5, down from a 1.0 to a 0.5 milligrams per liter phosphorus limit. We think you should too. And we would accept the 0.5. So even though we've, essentially what they're saying is, even though we've laid out this technical analysis that says our guidance says the only acceptable thing would be have essentially no discharge or down to a 0.007 milligrams per liter, that we would take a 0.5 because that's better. Now, Ohio came right out of the gate and said, that's essentially arbitrary and capricious. You're saying the science has to get you to a certain point, and yet you're going to take something else. On what basis? And if you take it now, who says you're not going to change it in the future? So Ohio EPA in those slides hit really hard on that EPA's analysis was legally deficient. And it was an end run to really insert a new rule by permit oversight. You know, something that's a permit by permit situation that's supposed to be fact specific to the permittee, they're trying to impose a new rule. In fact, US EPA said in the hearing, they think this should apply, their new 0.5 goal, which is not in their specific objection letter, should apply to everybody in the Lake Erie Basin, not just lake dischargers, not just Central Basin, but everybody in the northern third of the state who has a POTW should be bound by this. Ohio EPA, if you read through the slides, had an analysis of why that was technically flawed. Ohio has done its own reasonable potential analysis. It has shown that the POTWs make up a small fraction of the discharge of nutrients and phosphorus in particular, that land use is the way to get the bang for the buck, that the POTWs and the communities have actually spent billions to get there. There's no industry technology to meet what US EPA says is required. It's an impossibility. So essentially you're setting up a permit that is impossible to comply with, and then have to force variances or other mechanisms, Euclid and people like Euclid, to do something else. And Ohio pointed out its aggressive efforts, including the TMDL we just talked about, aimed at where the real problem is. Ohio cannot have a one size fits all. There are actually slides in there that show why Ohio is not Michigan, Ohio is not Wisconsin, Ohio is not Illinois, because there are different factual circumstances. For example, Michigan, more than 50% of their phosphorus load that goes to Lake Erie comes from POTWs. So that is where they're going to get the bang for the buck. In Ohio, in Maumee, for example, POTWs make up just 7%, and they already have technology in there. And all the new permits, including Euclid's draft permits, require an optimization study to see how else you can do better instead of just meeting the 1.0. So very powerful presentation by Ohio. Euclid did its own presentation. That's available on Euclid's website. And Euclid went through some of the things that I did in the slides before. Euclid has prioritized and is sacrificing for water quality improvement at an extraordinary level. There's an environmental injustice to impose this on this community. And I'll talk more about that when I get to environmental justice. The microsystem flows from the west. The trend is showing no exceedances. So there's no need for a new radical policy via permit to solve something that is getting better. There are other comments that both the 2021 Lakes and Streams guidance and a 2022 nutrient memo is misapplied, and that this is not cost effective. And it's out of context. There's no reference to Clean Water Act integrated planning or otherwise. This is an important note. The public water system data shows no central basin exceedances since 2017. This season's about to end, and to date, there are no exceedances. In fact, it's been non-detect in the central basin. So you have to ask, how good is the guidance model when the data shows something very different? When US EPA's model says you can have no discharges in the central basin in order to bring this into compliance, and yet it's going beneath the level on its own somehow. It means the model is not governing reality. So there's a hope that with the full 5-year look back, that there will be a delisting of this, and this issue may not have a basis to stand on. What are the next steps? US EPA still has to respond to the hearing comments. If they change their position or retain their position, Ohio EPA has 30 days to revise the permit to match US EPA's response, or else the permit writing and issuing falls to US EPA. What happens then has not been determined. We're still waiting to take each step in turn, but good chance it would be some sort of administrative appeal. Okay, what does this mean for me and my stormwater permit? This is the big thing for Euclid. Obviously, it would be a legal and physical impossibility to meet what US EPA has been demanding. For Lake Erie Basin communities, this is where it's coming, rule by permit enforcement with arbitrary compliance points. But none of this is based on the science that Ohio EPA has shown and others have identified is going to have an observable benefit to water quality and phosphorus levels in the central basin, which is where it's attacked there. The message for stormwater professionals is nutrient management is here to stay. Plan for your BMPs now because they're going to come through a TMDL or some other strong push from US EPA, and consider Clean Water Act integrated planning. Now, we've got just a few minutes left before I take some questions. I'm going to race through these. Environmental justice. This is a massive push by US EPA. I'm going to go through these slides that give you links to things to look at, and I'll also show you what Euclid said about it in its thing. This is important though. What is environmental justice? This is the definition that US EPA uses: the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all peoples with respect to enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. All right, keep that in mind of involvement. I point you to, again, a number of these. I'm going to go quickly through them. Take decisive action to advance environmental justice as part of EPA's strategic plan. Came right out of the gates with one of President Biden's first executive orders, an equity action plan. There were 4 enforcement memos that US EPA has already come out with that you should take a look at if you are interested in this. A lot of these are on how to integrate environmental justice into the regular enforcement situation and processes. There's a new office just last month created within EPA to combine 3 different programs that touch this into a single office of environmental justice and external civil rights. And it's really going to focus on the federal money and making sure that that gets implemented with the 40% that's supposed to go to environmental justice communities. There are some matters that, DOJ back in November of 2021 started with an environmental justice investigation in Alabama. You can take a look at this. The key to this is it's pushed it toward a settlement for a process to go forward for this county. But the gist of it was that people did not have sewer to their households, and that the county had failed in providing that sewer service. And so therefore was being enforced against. Here's recently, everyone heard about Jackson, Mississippi and their troubles with their wastewater plant. One of the class action lawsuits specifically mentioned environmental justice under a substantive due process claim that the people were exposed to toxins and pollutants in their drinking water. In Louisiana, EPA has active enforcement over some permits there, and a court threw out 14 air permits, citing environmental justice as a concern. The Inflation Reduction Act from this summer specifically talks about environmental justice and how $60 billion for investment basically on air emissions and air pollution. There's a lot of money and things available for water as well. This is a different twist on things. City of Akron, in proposing their consent decree amendments, talked about the environmental justice of the burden of paying for things that may not have environmental benefit. So this is using environmental justice as a shield, not as a regulatory sword. That remains to be seen whether that's going to be effective or not, because the focus is on very much on exposure and not on who pays for it when it's an environmental justice community that has to pay for it. These are the slides that Euclid used in the hearing. It actually used EPA's slide about environmental justice and what meaningful involvement means. Euclid pointed out, here's the definitions. There are 4 elements to what meaningful involvement means, and asserted in the permit specific objection context, Euclid had no involvement in that. The people of the city of Euclid had no involvement. There were no public hearings. There was nothing. This was a total top-down imposition from US EPA to Ohio EPA. So Euclid's conclusion was environmental justice was or is being denied by using this process and not letting Euclid prioritize what it's going to do given the sacrifices and the work it already has in process. All right, so one quick question to make sure people are still awake and paying attention. What is the name of Euclid's lakefront park that you should all visit when you have a chance? Put that in the survey line. Correct answer, of course, is Sims Park in Euclid, Ohio. The sunset is almost always like that. It certainly was last night. Okay, super quick racing through on other issues. Waters of the United States and the state, there are changes. This doesn't happen often, but there are changes. I'm just going to note, we have what is the water of the state? Well, you had the Obama rule, then you had the Trump rule, which when they tried to rescind, there's a Biden rule that's in process. Importantly, Monday, this was the first case in the new term of the Supreme Court. And there's a lot of discussion in Sackett versus US EPA as to what should be the waters of the state under the statute, waters of the US. And the justices were really struggling as to what a wetland, how adjacent do you have to be part of it? And what's a workable rule? This has been the issue with the rules that have been out there and rescinded and the previous cases in the Supreme Court. Watch for this to come out next June when this court issues its opinions. In Ohio, we no longer have ephemeral streams. We have ephemeral features that are not part of the waters of the state. It's House Bill 175. But remember, if they are, you still have to go to US EPA. They're not part of the waters of the state if they're not regulated by US EPA. This is a whole new regime. Those who have to deal with it, I'm sure, have been paying close attention. But this whole federal jurisdictional question really changes how broad this ephemeral feature change to our waters of the state is implemented. There's mitigation requirements in there. A couple quick hot topics, infrastructure. There's lots of money out there. You got to get in line for it. I'm just going to go through a bunch of these things. You know, you're out there. The disadvantaged communities definition has been changed on the drinking water side. There's new guidance. And then I want to mention integrated planning. When US EPA talks about one water approach, it's an integration approach. Integrated planning was made part of the Clean Water Act under the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act in 2019. There's an annual report to Congress about who's doing what. There's an ombudsman that's available. 13 municipalities had integrated plans as of 2021. I'm going to point you to another one. This integrated plan by the city of Lakewood has been adopted. They've been implementing it. And just this week, I believe the city of Lakewood is entering into consent decree that's built around this plan. It's integrated in the sense that it prioritizes the stormwater, wastewater, and collection system work throughout the city. So it's a good tool for Lakewood, and US EPA and Ohio EPA have recognized this. I can't encourage you enough as stormwater professionals for your MS4 to be planning where your best management practices and where your improvements are going to be to figure out a capital approach for those and to try to put them in a plan. That gives you some defense when others come to tell you what you should be doing. So if you've locally identified this, you have the ability under the Clean Water Act to hold up the integrated plan and say, this should be given, this prioritization should be what we should be under. That is the Speedo version. My apologies again for the delayed start, but if there are questions, glad to take them now.
Lou, one question in the chat, and it was answered by Felicia. Thank you, Felicia. So we will be posting the PowerPoint presentation to the WAMO website to everyone after the call. So your slide deck will be made available to folks.
Great.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I saw the one question is Euclid precedent setting for other permits and other permittees? Well, it's clearly US EPA's goal that it be precedent setting. It will be. I think the basis, though, there's really significant technical analysis questions whether it's supportable and sustainable as something other than arbitrary and capricious. So US EPA in the opening of the June 8th hearing basically said they want all of Lake Erie Basin in Ohio to have a new permit, and that would be the roadmap for it. So it's intended to be a precedent. Those of us like me who represent Euclid don't want it to be a precedent.
Another question posted in the chat, Lou, with the finger pointing towards the Western Basin, what should jurisdictions in that area begin to prepare for?
Great question. This is why I went through so much with the Maumee TMDL, and everyone who's in that basin should be looking at it closely and should be supporting. If you look at it, should be supporting the focus that Ohio EPA has on it. But I had those slides in there that are in the preliminary modeling report that are likely to come into the draft TMDL report when it comes out in December. And there's going to be some things that MS4s in that basin will have to do. There'll be further obligations. There's such a push, as you can see from US EPA, that everybody contribute and do more, and particularly in the Maumee Basin. So there's some other obligations for MS4s likely to come in that general permit in 2026.
Another question. Can you predict the future? Do you have any idea when the US Supreme Court decision is going to be made in the Sackett case?
That's good. I can predict that in this sense. Generally, US EPA, when they do the hearings and have the oral arguments in October or during the year. And if you remember from this last summer when we had all the big cases that came out at the end of June, they try to close them out by the end of June of the next year. That's considered one term of the court. So this will be a difficult case and be controversial, and they're going to work through a lot of things. I wouldn't expect a decision earlier than June on this particular case.
So June 2023 there, Katie. Another question, does the data imply that we need to regulate farming discharges for nutrients?
Well, that's a $65 billion question, I guess.
That is.
Inflating things. Yeah, I mean, obviously the TMDL lays out the technical basis. The question of how you affect change, regulation is just one tool in the toolbox. There's incentives, there's education. A lot of those things are being discussed and even implemented. Ohio's done some of them. There's different permitting as to when you can apply nutrients and fertilizers, and can't do it on frozen ground. You have to have certain certifications. All those things are there. Just to remind everybody, the Clean Water Act purposely exempted, we're we're on the cusp of the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. It passed in part because it exempted agriculture entirely. And that's how it got enough votes in Congress to get passed. So agriculture has always been exempted. The question, it's a big policy question, whether we should, have some sort of equivalent regulation of agriculture that way. And it strikes right at the sort of foundation of our politics as well.
Any other questions coming in on the chat here? Comment from Mike, great presentation, love the integrated planning method, but it's difficult when you have 45 communities in one urban county. I would agree to that.
It's true.
Pam, exempted as a point, but what about as a non-point?
So there's non-point source. The Clean Water Act is set up to be point source regulation. And that was to get basically industrial discharges and ultimately municipal discharges from keeping things like the Cuyahoga River fire or Boston Harbor explosion from happening. And it was considered that the family farm was a clean place. There are point sources in the agriculture. The CAFOs of a certain size are regulated. Non-point source came in the 80s with amendments with the Clean Water Act, and there are programs for them, but the regulation is much more difficult. So that's why the TMDLs have to account for it, but they have regulatory authority just over the point sources.
Excellent. Collaboration between Ohio EPA and ODA is the limiting factor on what can be done for the ag non-point.
Yeah,
Law
this is a
versus
question.
program. Thanks, Pam.
Yes.
Any other questions out there? Excellent. Thanks so much, Lou, for your time today. We really appreciate it. Ohio Stormwater Association would also like to thank our sponsors listed here on this slide for your viewing pleasure. If you are interested in being a sponsor of the Ohio Stormwater Association, you can please reach out to Kelly or Bob Lentz. Their emails are there below, and we would love to have your support. Also, if you're interested in being involved with the Ohio Stormwater Association, we are looking for volunteers to serve on various committees. Listed there are committees. You can reach out to Kelly Kubander, who is the president currently of OSWA, to indicate any of your interest on serving on our committees. I will forewarn you that generally volunteering to serve on a committee does generally lead to becoming a board member eventually. So be wary of that. But we would love to have your assistance. We do have an upcoming OSWA event on October 27th. It will be hosted by the OWEA and OSWA jointly. It's a watershed workshop in Dublin, Ohio, and you can find out more information about that on our websites. And finally, thank you everybody for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you.